Over the next 2 days, we're thrilled to present an incredible lineup of 66 sessions featuring insights from more than 80 distinguished speakers. These sessions will focus on knowledge sharing, the latest trends, and inspiring ideas from industry leaders, offering valuable opportunities for thought-provoking discussions. For the most up-to-date agenda, please visit our website at cybersec-asia.net or scan the QR code located on the back of your badge to access our mobile application. To kick things off, we are honored to present a session by CrowdStrike, who will be sharing valuable insights on the rise of cross-domain attacks. Please give a round of applause to Ruevitzwan, Isa, Regional Manager, Solution Engineering, CrowdStrike, Southeast Asia.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Hope you had a wonderful start to the day so far. So my name is Ruevitzwan Isa, or Ru for short. I am the Sales Engineering Manager for CrowdStrike for the Southeast Asian region. So for the topic today, I'm not just going to talk about just one specific topic. Rather, I'm going to touch about multiple domain attacks in what we call cross-domain attacks and the rise of them that we are seeing today. So when we talk about attacks, we can't not speak about adversaries, right? And you see some of the adversaries here on the screen right now. You may have seen some of them in blogs and articles. And you can see there are names like famous Cholima from North Korea. We have the spiders, which are e-crime groups, right? So you see Scattered Spider, Punk Spider, and you see Static Kitten, for example, from Iran. So these are just some of the adversaries that are really, really active today, right? And when we talk about adversaries, it's all about their motivation. What are they aiming to achieve? What are their objectives, right? So we have the nation-state adversaries, for example, like famous Cholima, who are, all they want to do is espionage, right? It's all about stealing data. It's all about spying on your activities and so on. And when we talk about the spider groups, right? So these are e-crime groups where their motivations is all about money, right? Dollar and cents, and how to get rich very quickly. So adversaries are trying to innovate their way into getting into your environment quicker and quicker. So in CrowdStrike, we have a metric that we measure every year, and we call it the breakout time, right? So what is the breakout time? The breakout time is the time taken by the adversary at the point of entry into your environment up to the point of lateral movement. So based on our report last year, the average time taken for the adversary breakout time is 62 minutes. So that's just slightly above 1 hour. But when you look at the screen right now, this is the fastest recorded time that we have seen over the past 12 months. And this is staggering, right? This is 2 minutes and 7 seconds. So why is this important? So for those of you who have your own SOC teams in-house, for those of you who have your own analyst team looking into your detections and your logs and so on, there's one very important question that you need to ask yourself and ask your team as well. Can we respond quicker than the adversary? And if this particular adversary gets into your environment and it only takes them 2 minutes, can your team respond quicker than 2 minutes? So this is why in CrowdStrike, we measure this metric because we strive to ensure that, how can we help teams out there to be quicker in the way that they investigate? How can we help them be quicker in the way that they respond to the particular attack, right? So that is why we always measure the breakout time. And let's talk about the adversaries in further detail, right? So they have evolved over time, and what they do today is very different than what they've done in the past 2-3 years. Instead of trying to brute force their way into your Active Directory, for example, what they're doing right now is that all they need to do is just to go into the dark web. They'll probably purchase a legitimate credential, which is your username and password. and log in as any employee would do every single day, right? So when they log in as a legitimate employee, it is very, very difficult for any cybersecurity solution to detect that particular attempt, right? So they are leveraging on legitimate credentials. And not only that, right? So when we look at the tech stack in your environment, when you look at the number of technology providers that you have, you may have one for your network, you may have one for your endpoint, for the cloud, for identity, so on and so forth. There's always potential of having what we call security gaps in between these silos, right? And this is where the attackers are exploiting those gaps, because they know, what if I were to attack multiple domains in your environment? What if I were to attack your identity? What if I were to attack your endpoint? So on and so forth. Is your team quick enough to be able to correlate that particular attack? Is your team quick enough to be able to discover that I'm trying to attack you? And is your team quick enough to respond to that, right? So they are always looking for different gaps within your environment. And that leads me to the third point as well, right? The moment they get hold of one particular domain, regardless, it could be endpoint, cloud, and so on, they will always move laterally across domains, right? So the messaging here today is very different, again, than, say, 2 or 3 years ago. We typically try to focus on specific domains. For example, how do you secure your endpoint security? How do you secure your cloud security? So on and so forth. Today, we have to kind of change our mindset and say, how do we secure our environment as a whole across multiple domains? And that's what we're trying to address in this presentation today. So, aside from the breakout time, for CrowdStrike, we publish an annual report called the Threat Hunting Report. And just based on last year's report, as you can see, right, there are a lot of different statistics on the screen. But there's just a couple that I want to call to your attention. If you look at the third point, 5 of the top 10 MITRE tactics observed were identity-based. So think about that for a second, right? How many of us have put a lot of emphasis on identity protection? Right? It's relatively new. Identities are not new, right? But looking at securing your AD, looking at securing your Entra, looking at securing any of your identity stores, for example, how much emphasis have you put into securing those infra within your environment? Because half of the top 10 techniques that we observed targets identity, right? So that's one domain. The next point that I want to call to your attention will be cloud, right? So if you look at the third and second last pointers on the screen, there was 75% increase in cloud intrusions. And to add on top of that, there were more than 100% increase in cloud-conscious adversaries. So what do we mean by that? Adversaries now are more savvy when it comes to the cloud, right? So they are very cloud-conscious. They know for a fact that once they are able to enter one of your workloads, for example, or one of your endpoints, they know for sure that that particular workload is hosted on, let's say, AWS, Google, Azure, and so on, right? So the moment they gain access into your environment, they will then employ cloud-based attacks rather than your traditional on-premise attacks. So that's what we call cloud-conscious adversaries. They understand that they have access into your cloud environment, be it your control plane, be it your data plane, and once they understand that, they will employ the right tactics to move laterally, right? So again, point number 1 was identity. Point number 2 is cloud. The last point here, there was a 70% increase in the usage of RMM tool, right? Remote management tools, right? So what does this mean? If you look into your environment today, and if you have visibility across all of the tools that your employees are using, it's very likely that you would see RMM tools like AnyDesk, TeamViewer, FleetDeck, any kind of RMM tools which are, common, right? These are not malicious payloads and so on, right? These are very common tools used by your team to remotely access another endpoint, right? But here's the kicker. the adversaries know this, right? And it's very likely that you do not have a rule to stop such deployments within the environment. So they are using that to their advantage. So they are using RMM tools. So the moment they get entry into your environment, they deploy RMM tools like TeamViewer, AnyDesk, and so on to achieve persistence, right? So for those of you who are familiar with the MITRE attack technique framework and so on, you understand that after initial access, persistence must happen, right? And that's where we are seeing, right, in terms of the trend. So cross-domain, again, identity, cloud, and the usage of RMM tools are something that we need to consider. So what exactly are cross-domain attacks, right? So I've hinted at it earlier on, but basically it's an attack that encompasses multiple domains in your environment. For example, if you would look at the bubble at the top, the adversary will very likely gain some sort of credential from your environment, right, to get into your network. Second, once they have that, they will try to move laterally, and it's very often nowadays that they will target your cloud. Why? This is because for on-premise security, I would say that we are all almost experts at it, right? So it's a traditional thing where you have your on-premise perimeter, you have your firewalls, your endpoint security, and so on. When you start lifting and shifting your workloads to the cloud, that's when you have a gap in the skills, right? You have to understand the different facets, you have to understand the different elements when it comes to a cloud deployment. And this is why attackers will try to target your cloud, especially your control plane. And once they have that foothold, they will then move to your endpoint, right? So, and we have seen a lot of different cross-domain attacks encompassing all of these different domains that you see on the screen, right? So this is why we have to be very conscious about, again, not focusing on silo domains, rather, how do we secure our environment as a whole and secure ourselves against cross-domain attacks. So when you look at the nature of an attack, and as this slide builds out, right, so this is very common across all of the major attacks that we have seen from the past 12, 18 months, right? Like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't just stop at endpoint, right? It will include things like your Azure AD or your Entra, for example, right? It will then lead to an endpoint being compromised. It will lead to your MFA being compromised, your cloud logs, so on and so forth, right? So this is very common, and this is something that our threat hunting team, which we call Falcon Overwatch, observes all the time, right? And I can tell you from experience, a lot of the victims that we see involved in this, they'll be astonished at the level of detail, the level of stealthiness that is employed by the adversary when they try to compromise multiple domains in your environment. So let me give you one real-world example, Scattered Spider, right? So if you have read about Scattered Spider, you know that they've been really active for the past 3 years now. They always target the FSI industry. And also, just for your knowledge, they love to target entities in Thailand as well, right? But to give you an example, and this is taken off a real-life attack. So what happened was that they followed the same structure that I showed earlier, and they targeted identity first. In this case, they ran a phishing campaign. I'm sure you're all familiar with phishing campaigns, and they managed to get valid credentials out of that campaign. So once they have those legitimate credentials, it just so happened that that credentials can be used for the cloud control plane, right? So for those of you who don't know, the cloud control plane is really the backbone for your entire cloud infrastructure. This is where you determine the identities. This is where you control the accounts. This is where you control the privileges. This is where you can deploy virtual machines, workloads, containers, so on and so forth, right? So they use that credential to log into the cloud control plane. And once they did that, now they have a foothold, right? So they were able to deploy multiple rogue VMs, right? Rogue virtual machines. So what does this mean, right? So because the victim was not aware of the attack, the attacker just started spinning up multiple VMs where they have full control of, and with those particular VMs, they now started moving laterally to endpoints on-prem, right? And they started deploying RMM tools like FleetDeck and so on to gain persistence, right? So this is a typical anatomy of an attack today. So why am I saying this again? Try to relate it back to your own environment, right? You may have multiple tools available today, multiple tools deployed, but can you really detect something like this, right? And oftentimes a lot of customers will say, hey, you know what? We have all these logs in our SIM. And if you were to speak to a SIM administrator, try asking the administrator if he or she would be able to detect something like this within 2 minutes and 7 seconds, right? So it's highly unlikely. It's always after the fact. You probably discover this a week or a month later, where you just realize, oh, you know what? I think we got breached, right? So that is very important for us to understand that we need the skills, we need the technology to be able to help us detect against cross-domain attack. And the way this slide is designed is in a way that they're all puzzle pieces, right? So when you group them together, this is really what Scattered Spider is all about, right? These are the tactics that they use to get into your environment. So how do we address this, right? So you need to have a solution in-house that's able to provide you not just domain visibility, but cross-domain visibility, right? So again, if you have silo tools today, one for endpoint, one for cloud, and so on, think about, does that allow your team to respond quicker? Does that allow your team to be proactive in terms of stopping breaches and so on? So that is very important. But once you have visibility, it's very important to have threat intel enrichment, right? Having logs in your SIM will not help your team stop attacks, right? It just gives more homework to your team. But if you have threat intel enrichment, if you're able to understand, hey, you know what? If you're looking at this tactic followed by another tactic and so on, this looks like a scattered spider attack, that helps your team immensely, right? Then you're able to say, hey, you know what? I understand what they're going to do next. I can anticipate what they're going to do next. We can get ahead of them, right? So that is very important, understanding your threat adversary. And finally, these solutions should be able to provide actionable insights. It's one thing to show you a detection. It's another thing to provide you recommendations on what to do, right? So again, detection for us is always the easy part. Yes, we detect something. What are you going to do about it, right? So actionable insights is very important when it comes to stopping cross-domain threats. So in terms of CrowdStrike's own platform, and I know it's a bit of a busy slide, I'm not going to go through everything. So with all of that pain points, with all of that evolving threats that we understand, we built a solution to ensure that, yes, we are able to have cross-domain visibility, and we're not just talking about first-party data. We're not talking about just CrowdStrike data, right? So we are able to pull in third-party data as well, right? So if you have solutions on your network, on your proxies and so on, which are not CrowdStrike-branded solutions, that's fine. So what we would like to achieve is, are we able to now pull in all of that data and provide you an automated correlation powered by AI, right? And as you can see, the biggest, most important circle or semicircle that you see on the screen is the one right at the bottom, single agent, right? So can we achieve what we set out to do? Can we help teams stop breaches and at the same time ensure that the deployment will be very, very simple for our customers? And which is why CrowdStrike, we are fully cloud-based, and we use the single agent for every single module that you see on the screen right now. And with all of that data, and you can see on the screen, right, cloud telemetry, identity telemetry, endpoint telemetry, third-party telemetry, and not just that, right? Threat intel is very important. We even bring in telemetry from the dark web, right? So with all of that telemetry built or consumed to our platform, and we enrich that with threat intel, that is how we aim to help our customers in stopping breaches, and especially being faster than the 2 minute, 7 second metric that you saw earlier. But there's one key thing, right, that I haven't pointed out. So in the age of AI, in the age of technology, there's something that we cannot replace. That's you and I, the human element. And I think that's very important, right? So there has been a lot of buzzword around AI and how AI will be replacing humans. And, and to a certain extent, there are certain things that AI can do, right? But there's one very important element that glues everything together, right? And again, which is you and I, the human element. When we talk about threat hunting, when we talk about understanding threats, nothing beats the human mind. Nothing beats the human eye. For the threat hunters out here today, you would understand that when you see 10, 20, 30 detections on the screen, AI will not help you make sense of what really happened in your environment. It's really the human threat hunting skills that will then build that narrative and say, I know what happened here, with the help of AI, right? And that's what CrowdStrike always preaches. Yes, we love our AI. In fact, we have a huge AI component within our platform. We love technology. But the one thing that will never go away will be threat hunting. So that is why we will always say it's a combination of, again, as you know, people, process, technology, right? That will ensure the success of keeping your environment secure. So in terms of the platform, like I said, for CrowdStrike, these are just some of the numbers, right? So we collect trillions of events per day. In terms of our threat intel, we are tracking right now, to date, almost 260 different threat adversaries, right? So everything about their TTPs, right? Their tactic, techniques, and procedures, all of the different CVEs that they target, what kinds of RMM tools do they deploy, so on and so forth. Everything is part of the threat intel repository that is part of the Falcon platform. And based on our threat intel as well, we publish about 800,000 IOCs per day, right? With the hopes of helping our customers stop or prevent such payloads from executing in the environment. So again, there are a lot of numbers there, right? But the key point of this slide is that we take threat intel very seriously, and it's also part of the human element, right? Threat intel doesn't come from AI. Yes, AI can help again, but it's really the threat researchers, the intel experts that understand the changing landscapes of adversaries, and then they publish all this information within the Falcon platform. So to round this up, right? So there are 5 key takeaways that I want to share. And number one, again, I've talked a lot about identities, and I truly believe that the shift to focus to identity has to happen today, right? Understand your identity stores. Where are your accounts? Where are your users? Where are your privileges? Are they in your on-prem AD? Are they in Entra AD? Are they in Jump Cloud? Are they somewhere else? Understand where your identities are and secure them, right? And secondly, cloud. Cloud is a huge attack surface for adversaries today, right? In fact, for the report that's coming out later this year, I fully expect the numbers to increase once again, because all of us are, we are continuing to learn how to secure the cloud landscape, but it just evolves so quick, and the adversaries are just getting more complex, right? So effective cloud security is a must. Number 3, obviously the endpoint. Where do you house your crown jewels? Where do you house your data, your most critical pieces of information, your IPs and so on? It'll be on an endpoint, right? It could be a laptop, desktop, server, VM, container, whatever it is, right? Those are all endpoints. So we need to continue to secure the endpoints as well. But once you have all of that, instead of going through the silo route, how can we have cross-domain visibility and hunting? Can my solution cater towards understanding complex cross-domain attacks? Does it help my team respond in time? So on and so forth, right? So that is very important. And the 5th point, and this is also very important, understand your adversary. Understand who they target. Understand how they target, how they exploit your environment. Because if you know your adversary, half the battle is won. And who said that? Sun Tzu, right? So, and it still holds true, right, in cybersecurity. Understand who's targeting you or potentially targeting you out there, and then proactively take steps to ensure that you do not fall as a victim. So with that, last slide, right? So we have a QR code that you can scan right now, and there are a couple of questions that you can answer, and we are giving out that very, very desirable Lego F1 car to one lucky winner, right? So I'll leave this up just for a second if you want to scan. And the draw will be conducted later today at the CrowdStrike booth at 3 p.m. Okay, I'll leave it up for just a bit. Okay, so the timer is saying get off the stage. So thank you so much for your attention. CrowdStrike will be here all event long, so please approach us at the booth, and we'll be able to share more in terms of our products and our platform and so on. Thank you so much, and have a great event ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruevitzwan, Isa of CrowdStrike. I'm going to do a short summary in Thai first before we go to the next session. คุณ Ruevitzwan นะคะได้เล่าให้ฟังนะคะในเซสชันแรกค่ะถึงเทรนด์ต่างๆนะคะของภัยคุกคามทางไซเบอร์ค่ะที่เกิดขึ้นทั่วโลกนะคะโดยคุณ Ruevitzwan ค่ะได้เล่าถึงการวิเคราะห์นะคะแล้วก็ภัยคุกคามใหม่ๆนะคะที่เกิดขึ้นและตัวอย่างสถานการณ์จริงค่ะทำให้เราคนนะคะได้เข้าใจค่ะถึงความเสี่ยงที่องค์กรต่างๆตอนนี้จะต้องเผชิญนะคะไม่ว่าจะเป็นเรื่องของความเข้าใจว่า identity ของเราอยู่ตรงไหนนะคะแล้วเราจะต้องโฟกัสในการป้องกันที่ตรงไหนค่ะรวมถึงการ attack ที่เพิ่มขึ้นมากเลยนะคะในระบบcloud ค่ะรวมถึง endpoint ต่างๆนะคะที่เราจะต้องป้องกันอย่างมากที่สุดเลยค่ะนอกจากนี้นะคะคุณ Ruevitzwan ก็ได้เล่าถึง cross domain attack นะคะซึ่งเรียกได้ว่าเป็นสิ่งที่กลายเป็นmainstream ในปัจจุบันนะคะซึ่งจะ attack ในหลายๆส่วนนะคะแล้วก็ต่อพร้อมๆกันนะคะทำให้การเสริมความปลอดภัยในระบบ cross domain security เนี่ยเป็นสิ่งที่ทุกท่านจะมองข้ามไม่ได้นะคะเพราะว่าแนวทางปฏิบัตินี้ค่ะจะสร้างระบบป้องกันที่แข็งแกร่งค่ะเพื่อจัดการให้กับความซับซ้อนนะคะของการโจมตีทางไซเบอร์ในยุคปัจจุบันค่ะนอกจากนั้นนะคะคุณ Ruevitzwan ได้เล่าถึงประสิทธิภาพของตัว CrowdStrike Falcon นะคะซึ่งเป็นแพลตฟอร์มที่มีการใช้ทั้ง AI นะคะแล้วก็ใช้มนุษย์เป็นคนช่วยนะคะในการตรวจจับแล้วก็ตอบสนองกับภัยคุกคามค่ะแบบ real time นะคะพร้อมทั้งมีโซลูชันที่ช่วยให้องค์กรช่วยปกป้องข้อมูลแล้วก็ระบบได้อย่างมั่นใจค่ะ